Hello again, everyone. Today we're actually changing gears just a little bit. We're going to move away from solving equations and we're going to talk about something that's way more interesting to most of you. We're going to talk about calculating simple interest. Okay, in other words, we're going to talk about money. So first off, let's talk about what interest is. Basically, the way interest works is, and it's typically used in banks, when you deposit money into a savings account, they will give you interest on the amount of money that you have in there. So for example, let's say that you put $1,000 into your savings account and the bank says we're going to give you interest on that account of, let's say, 2%. So they will basically take your money and they will pay you for keeping money in the bank. They don't pay a whole lot, but it's something. The reason that they do that is they like to take your money and they like to invest it in stock market or loaning out to other people and collecting even more interest on the money that they loan than the interest that they give to you. That way the banks actually make some money and it's not just we'll pay you money for giving us your money, but we don't have any way to get our own money back. So that's what the banks do, is they take your money, they invest it in other areas, and then when they get money back from those investments, they give you a part of the money that they get back. So what we're going to do today is we're going to calculate some simple interest just to show you the way that you can in the future, or possibly even right now, calculate how much money you will have at the end of any given amount of time just by collecting interest on the money you have in the bank. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the simple interest formula. And this is a formula that you can use to figure out how much money you will end up with for any given amount of time that you have money in the bank. So let's start with the formula. The formula for calculating simple interest is I equals PRT. Okay, and you'll remember that when you have variables right next to each other, that's really a multiplication. Okay, so I represents the amount of interest that you would gain from having your money in the bank. Okay, so this right here represents the amount of interest that the bank would pay you. Okay, the next step the next variable would be the P, and the P stands for principal. And when we talk about principal in this case, we're talking about the amount of money that you put into the bank initially. Okay, so when we talk about principal, it's the amount of money that you initially put into the bank. So if you put in $1,000, that would be your principal. The next variable that we have up here is the variable R, and R represents the interest rate per year that the bank will pay you. So we're just going to write in rate, and you guys need to make sure that you understand that that's the interest rate that the bank will pay you. It's not the value of the money that you get back. The last part is the variable T, and this one actually is, I think, the easiest to understand because we use it all the time. But the variable T represents time. In this case, it's the amount of time that you keep the money in the bank. And it's time in years, because when banks calculate interest, it's on a year basis. So there we have all the different parts of our formula, and now we need to actually see how does this formula work in the real world. So we're going to have a problem on the screen here in just a second, and we are going to find the simple interest with regards to the problem that we put up here. So let's get that problem on the screen, and I'm going to erase our formula, so hopefully you wrote that down, at least all the different parts of it. I'll keep the formula I equals PRT up on the screen, but you hopefully will be able to remember what all the different parts are. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, so here we have our problem, and I'll read it for you as well. The problem says, suppose you deposit $500 into a savings account. The interest rate on that account is 4% per year. Find the simple interest earned in 6 years. So what we need to do first is we need to figure out what are all the different parts of this problem that I can use in my formula that I have at the top of the page. So the first thing we have in our first sentence, it says that we deposited $500. That $500 represents the principal. In other words, that's the amount of money that we put into the savings account. And we can see that because it says you deposit $500 into a savings account. The next part that we're going to look at is it says in our word problem here, the interest rate is 4%. Okay? So if we remember back to our notes that we took just a second ago, the interest rate is represented by the R. That's the rate that we get our money back as a bonus. So our interest rate is 4%. The last part that we have to look for is the amount of time that we leave the money in there. And it says that we need to find the simple interest earned in 6 years. So there we have the 3 parts of our formula that we need in order to solve the problem and figure out how much interest we would be earning in that amount of time. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to just put everything together into our problem and see what we come up with. So we are looking for the value of I, which represents the amount of money that we earn. That's our interest. And we're going to substitute in for the P, we're going to use $500. So we'll go ahead and put 500. The next thing that we're going to have is we're going to have our interest rate. So we're going to multiply 500 by our interest rate, which in this case is 4%. And then we're going to multiply that by the amount of time that we're going to leave the money in the bank, which in the problem that we're solving is 6 years. So here we have our formula, interest equals principal times rate times time, with all the values in our equation. Now, before we can actually get started, we need to make sure that we change 4% because we can't multiply by a percent. We need to make that a decimal. So to turn 4% into a decimal, remember that we divide by 100, which is what a percentage is. It's 4 out of 100. Or, as a shortcut, we move our decimal 2 spaces to the left. So that's going to create a decimal of 0.04. So that's the decimal that we're actually going to use in our problem. And we're going to go ahead and finish solving this. Let's write in our other values that we have. So I have 500 times 0.04 times 6. So the final step is just to multiply it all together and see what we come up with. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll do all the work off to the right over here. Our first part, moving from left to right, its multiplication is 500 times 0.04. Now you don't have to do that as your first step. You could multiply 500 times 6 or 0.4 times 6. But for the sake of this problem, I'm just going to go left to right just to keep things simplified. So I'm going to multiply 500 times 0.04. So here we have 500, and we have 0.04, and we're going to multiply that out. 4 times 0, of course, is 0. 4 times 0 again is 0. And then 4 times 5 is 20. Now I could multiply by the tenths place and multiply 0 times 500, and I would get 0, so there's no sense in doing that. So I'm just going to move on, and I'm going to figure out where my decimal goes. Now remember from elementary school, the decimal always moves however many spaces there were for decimal places in the original problem. So in my original problem, I had 2 decimal places, which means I'm going to move my decimal 2 spaces to the left to show that I have 2 decimal places in the original problem. So that means that when I multiply these together, 500 times 0.04 will give me a value of 20. So I have in my problem now 20 times 6, and that's my final step that I need to take to figure out how much interest I will earn in 6 years. So our final step, like we said, multiply 20 times 6, and I'll do that over on the right just in case someone needs a quick refresher on multiplication. 6 times 0 is 6, 6 times 2 is 12. Oh my goodness, I just made a mistake. 6 times 0 is not 6. 6 times 0 is 0, and 6 times 2 is 12. So we end up with 120. And remember that this is talking about the amount of interest that we earned, which is a value of dollars. So when we write our answer, we have to write not only 120, but we need to remember to write in that it's $120. So this is how you use simple interest, the formula for simple interest, to calculate the interest earned for any given amount of time when you are given the principal, the interest, and the amount of time that it's in the bank. There are a couple of variations that we're going to talk about, so we're going to continue that now. So let me give you a new problem, and we'll talk about some of the changes that we need to make in order to solve the new problem. Okay, so I know this problem looks very similar, but there is one change, and it's a very important change that we need to talk about. You will notice that with the time on this problem, it's a little bit different. We still have the $500 per year, that's still, or $500 rather, as our deposit, that's still our principal. The rate is still 4%, that didn't change. But what did change this time is the amount of time. It's only 3 months. And remember, in our formula when we first talked about it, the time is the representative time in years. Okay? So when we're talking about months, we need to take into account that we can't just multiply by 3, because that would mean we were talking about 3 years. So we are going to have to find a way to represent 3 months with regards to a year. So let's go through really quickly, and let's just finish filling in what we do know, and then we'll talk about where we get our value for the time. So we're going to have the interest is equal to, the principal is still $500, and we're going to jump one tiny little thing. I'm not going to write 4% because we just solved this. We know that instead of 4%, we're really talking about 0.04 because we need to have a decimal. Now when we talk about the time in this case, because it's 3 months, we need to put that in terms of years. And the way that we can do that is we can say, well, we know that there are 12 months in one whole year. But I only want to know about 3 of those 12 months. So we can write a fraction where we're talking about a part of one whole year. So 3/12. The 12 representing the 12 months of the year, the 3 representing how many of those months we left the money in the bank. So we're going to end up multiplying by 3/12, and that represents the amount of time that our money was in the bank. 3 months out of 12 months in 1 year. So we're going to go ahead and solve this now. And remember, just like last time, I'm going to go left to right. 500 times 0.04, and if you'll recall, that came out to be a total of 20. So I'm just going to skip to that since we already multiplied that out one time. So I have 20 times 3/12. And at this point, a lot of you will probably say, well, why can't I simplify 3/12? And you can. There's nothing wrong with that. It actually will make the division a lot simpler, or the multiplication a lot simpler. So if you'd like to do that, go right ahead. And if we do that, I think I'm going to do that also. 3/12 we know will simplify into 1/4. We can divide the numerator and denominator by 12, and that will give us a value of 1/4. So now we can go back and multiply again, and this time the multiplication will be quite a bit easier, because now we don't have that 12 to worry about. The numerator is a 1, which means multiplication is going to be simple. So let's multiply that, and when we multiply it this time, we're going to find that we're going to turn this into a fraction. 20 times 1 and 1 times 4, that will give us a value of 20/4. And this represents the amount of interest that we've earned. Now 20/4 is not a very good dollar amount. You can't say I have $20/4. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we do actually need to divide this out. So if we divide 20 divided by 4, we're going to end up with 5, which is the dollar amount in interest that we will earn on $500 if we leave that money in the bank for 3 months. So once again, just as a quick reminder, the big difference between this problem was the fact that we did not have a value in years, we had a value in months. And we have to represent that by showing that 3 months is really 3 months out of a possible 12 months in 1 year. Everything solves the same way from that point on. That was really the only difference that there was in the two problems. So now, you guys all have the ability to go through your bank accounts, look at how much money you have in there, figure out the percentage rate that the bank is giving you, and you could, if you wanted to, calculate, if you left that money in there, how much money would you have, let's say, when you turned 16 and you wanted to buy your first car. So this is one of the very practical applications of math and something that everyone should have a good grasp on because it affects everyone's life. So there you go. You can now calculate simple interest if you know the interest rate, how much money is in the bank, and how long you're planning on leaving it in there.